Development Committee meeting to order. If you do wish to participate by commenting, there are cards available, and please fill them out and pass them forward, as is the custom here. Pleased to welcome Councilman Krikorian and Councilwoman Martinez with us. I understand that Councilman Cedillo will be joining us momentarily. Looking at our agenda, we will move items 2 and 3 on consent, unless there's an objection. Okay, well, that will be the order. And let's move to item number 1. Mr. Clerk.
Item number 1 is a joint CLA and CAO report relative to the impact of the City of LA of the proposed minimum wage for hotel workers.
Okay, I want to thank you all for being here on this matter. We've got several cards. We're going to take the cards first. Because we have such a number of interests, I'm going to ask that you limit your remarks to 1 minute. I know it's going to be difficult, but limit it to 1 minute, and we'll give a chance for everyone to be heard. So first up, let's have Mike Shofit. Mike. Thank you. And then, well, let me just tee up the next group of speakers. Veronica Perez, Mark Sokol, Jeff Zaringman, and Bora Chung.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Shofit. I'm the general manager of the Mayfair Hotel, and wanted to speak against this ordinance. It does have a tremendous financial impact on our property. We estimate it to be right at $900,000. It would force us to cut people, and it's people that we're trying to help in this ordinance, as I understand it. So it's important to reach the ones we're trying to reach, but this is not the way to do it. It has a financial impact. It would hurt us tremendously. It would force us to cut jobs. We're in the process of beginning a full renovation of our property, putting about $5 to $7 million back into the economy of Los Angeles, and that project could be put on hold or moved if this ordinance did come into effect. So from a hotelier standpoint, we need to relook at the process and see if there's not a better way.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Good afternoon. Veronica Perez, representing the Small Hotel Coalition for Jobs. Hotels in the 100 to 150 room range. These are independent, family-owned local businesses. You'll hear from them today. They are the next 3 speakers. They are personally invested in providing a quality work environment for their employees. They have good wages, health benefits, and generous bonuses. We understand that you may be considering a phased-in approach. We are strongly opposed to a phase-in that includes hotels in the 100 to 150 room category. These small, family-owned hotels are differently situated and lack the economies of scale of larger hotels and are far more susceptible to the negative impacts of a wholesale change to their wage structure. A wage increase of this magnitude will trigger worker layoffs in these small hotels, as you'll hear from them today, and put them at a competitive disadvantage. Even with the hotels in the under 100 room categories, if you go with 100 rooms, that won't have to increase their rates. This 100 to 150 rooms are really going to suffer the most here. We ask you to think about them, increase that room threshold if you move forward to 150. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Sokol. In 1975, my dad built and opened the Hotel Irwin in Venice. We're still a family-owned business, and my father, who's almost 80, and I work at the hotel every day. If this ordinance passes, the cost to our small family-owned hotel would result in us having no choice but to reduce our staff, some of which have been with us for up to 38 years. We would have to cut 15 to 20% of our employees. We can't raise room rates because we wouldn't be competitive with small hotels in neighboring cities like Santa Monica and Marina del Rey. I'm shocked that a family-owned hotel of our size, only 119 rooms, is being lumped into the same category of hotels many, many times larger, 3, 4, 5 times larger, up to 1,200 room hotels. This is an apples and orange comparison. We don't have corporate backing and investors to help absorb the increased expenses. As much as we would like to, we simply don't have the resources. This result is contrary to the goals of your legislation. We hope that if you proceed, you will seriously consider raising the room threshold to 150 to protect small family-owned businesses and the jobs that we provide and create. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Zarin. I'm a native Angelino and CEO of the Hollywood Hotel. As a young kid, I was inspired by the Conrad Hilton story, and I knew I wanted to run a hotel one day. So as a teenager, I started to convert an apartment building my family owned into a hotel, room by room, with my own hands. Hollywood Hotel is family-owned today. We have 130 rooms and employ approximately 48 people. We are not a large hotel. We are not owned by a publicly funded REIT. And we do not have a corporate office in another state to shift funds from another hotel to cover our costs. Our operation starts and ends here in Los Angeles. I took a close look at the hotel list being circulated. The average room number of hotels in the 100 to 200 room category is only 139 rooms. The average room number of hotels in the 200 and above room category is 456, with some hotels having over 1,000 rooms. I'm here to tell you that the 130-room Hollywood Hotel is not a large hotel, and the numbers I cited speak for themselves. If you move forward, please increase the room threshold to 150 rooms.
Thank you.
I'm Bora Chang. 2 years ago, my father and I invested our life savings and became the Ramada franchisees. Our hotel is 130 rooms and is located in Western Yard, downtown. We have 30 employees. I run the hotel with my husband, father, and sister. We're 100% hands-on, working at the hotel 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I'm very worried about the consequences if this increased wage is applied to us. We already pay 10% franchise fee, and this additional cost will not be sustainable. As you know, we do not have enough hotel rooms near downtown to support our thriving convention center. We're pleased that with our location in West that we can support this important economic generator. Hotels in the 100-room category will be important in filling the hotel room gap to support the convention center. Please do not disincentivize this important hotel category. Another issue that is important to us is job opportunity for the youth. At this high starting wage, it will be hard to offer this job to youth with little job experience. We respectfully request that you recognize that hotels of our size are not large hotels and increase the room threshold to 150.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. Next up, John Marco, Ruben Gonzalez, Patrick Burns, and Fanny Ortiz.
Ready? I'm John Mark. I'm the general manager from the Kawata Hotel, which is downtown Los Angeles. It's a couple blocks of 2nd and Hill. 116-room hotel. First thing we'd probably do is cut the number of rooms we have. We would certainly lay off 20% of our workforce just to be able to maintain or stay close to where we are. So 20% cut in jobs that we have. I can't imagine how you're looking at a 50% wage increase. If you look at what that would do in the city of Los Angeles or any other business, how can you increase your wages from $10 an hour to over $15 an hour is just unimaginable. I don't know what any business that can handle a 50% wage increase. The other thing you need to consider is the tipped employees. There are a lot of tipped employees that make a lot of money in tips, whether they be food servers or banquet servers or bartenders. They make well over anywhere near a minimum wage. A lot of times somewhere in the name of $70,000, $80,000 a year in terms of when you add all their tipped incomes into it. So we need to have a different plan than what we have.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Fanny Ortiz, and I am a member of the Boyle Heights Neighborhood Council. I am speaking as an individual and as a resident of this community for 19 years. Our community is part of District 14, where nearly 1,100 hotel workers live. After carefully watching and researching this issue, it is very clear to me that our city tourism industry is a major source of poverty jobs in our city, but it shouldn't be. Far too many hotel workers in LA are underpaid, placing an unfair burden on taxpayers who are forced to subsidize the low wages offered by LA's largest hotels and leaving working families to struggle. Despite the upturn for hotels and good news for the industry in general, the rate of working poverty in LA's leisure and hospitality industry is the highest of any in the city, with workers earning just over $1,500 per month on average. This is both economically and morally reprehensible, and we are asking you to change that. Today, you have the opportunity to make a huge difference in the lives of thousands of hardworking Angelenos, and I truly hope that you will do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Patrick Burns. I'm a researcher with the Economic Roundtable. We conducted a citywide study looking at the hotel industry and found that average wages for hotel workers tend to be about $9 an hour for housekeepers, about $11 an hour for front desk staff, and about $12 an hour for staff working as bellhops, and that's including tips. This kind of puts the city of LA in a position paying less for these types of jobs than cities of San Diego, San Francisco, Las Vegas, New York, and only competing with a major destination of Phoenix nearby in terms of typical wages. This basically kind of leaves some of these households a bit challenged in terms of affording the basics, and we believe that the proposed ordinance would create kind of a lift in benefits and wages for households to kind of help out them in this regard. It would affect about 5,000 workers citywide and would bring their average wages up to about $31,970 per year. Thanks.
Thank you. Victor Navarro, Alexander Risudo, Mary Garcia, and Rico Roberts.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Victor Navarro. I'm a project director at the UCLA Labor Center. The hotel industry in Los Angeles is currently the largest employer of poverty wages jobs in the city. We know that 55% of the men and women who currently work in hotels are eligible for government assistance. This makes no sense in an industry that has seen 3 straight years of record revenues and continues to be one of the most highly subsidized industries in the city. The city of Los Angeles has spent nearly $1 billion to ensure the success of this industry. The opponents are arguing that it's okay for us to accept this gross inequality as a trade-off for the boom of these industries. But I don't accept that kind of trade-off. I think we should not do so, especially when we're dealing with the lives of hard-working families. The body of evidence tells us that workers' wages is good for the economy, so people living in poverty need not and should not be the cause of any successful industry. Around the country, cities like Seattle are enacting legislation to raise the minimum wage. Let's start where we can do it right here in Los Angeles and have the greatest impact with hotel workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Alexander Rosado. I'm here representing the Ritz-Carlton Los Angeles. I'm a bellman for 4 years. I usually deliver bags to customers on a day like today, but I'm here to deliver signatures and support on behalf of the 300-plus bellmen who are struggling to support their families because they don't make a decent wage. Hotel jobs should be good, family-supporting jobs, but as long as the hotel industry fights to keep wages low, all in the name of profits, our economy and families suffer. We should be working to ensure that hotel jobs are middle-class jobs for Angelenos, not poverty jobs. The hotels can afford it and our neighborhoods need it. We should raise LA. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Garcia. I am the president of Midtown North Hollywood Neighborhood Council. Earlier this year, my neighborhood council endorsed Raise LA campaign. I believe we are amongst the first to do so. We were honored to do it. For us, the proposal of quality of life issue for all of our 70,000 people we represent in the neighborhood, and my neighborhood council, we take it very seriously. The success of our business, property, and even every aspect of life is affected. The wages of our residents affects everything in our community, from the corner grocer to the small coffee shop. In North Hollywood, we are reinventing ourselves to be that livable, walkable community we once were. Our community is deeply impacted when our residents struggle to pay for food and children's care and rent. This is also a citywide problem. According to the U.S. Census, a total of 20% of our population in this city is below the poverty line. So what does that have to do with hotels? As we all know, the hotel industry is the largest employer of poverty wage jobs. So when we lift the wage, we lift the city. I'm asking you to please vote to lift the city, some of the hardest working and deserving workers in the city. I'm doing that. I'm asking you to do that for our neighborhoods and community. Thank you for all you do for our citizens.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rachel Roberts. I'm a small business owner. I have shops in both Los Feliz and Highland Park. I support the raise in the minimum wage because a lot of my neighbors and my community members would benefit from this and then therefore go out and spend some of their money throughout our community and enrich everyone, bring everyone along with them. I think that something to think about is that when I graduated from high school, I was made $4.25. That was minimum wage. That was a long time ago. At the time, since then, minimum wage has only doubled. However, gas at the time was 75 cents. My apartment was $180. Things have gone up 5 times as much during that time, but the minimum wage has only gone up twice, and it's really something to consider. No one can actually afford this. I had to tell my daughter that there's nothing wrong with having to live with your parents because that's what everyone has to do. Everyone these days at $9 an hour, you're going to be living with roommates or your parents. You're not going to be able to move out.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Next up, Mary Elena Durazo, James Elmendorf, Miguel Cordova.
Hello, members of the City Council, this committee. On behalf of the Federation of Labor, we are here to support the proposal to raise the minimum wage for hotel workers in Los Angeles. 10,000 hotel workers live in our neighborhoods. It's their hard work that makes tourism an economic engine for the entire city. Yet their share of the success hotels have enjoyed in LA is poverty, having to work more than one job to put food on the table. Supporting the minimum wage has reached a tipping point. So why start with hotels? I sit on the LA Convention Visitors Bureau. I know the kind of investment that's been made by the city in the tourism industry, enormous amounts of money for good. We want to create a prosperous, successful tourism industry. But we can't go by that trickle-down theory anymore because it just doesn't work. We need those workers to do better for themselves, their families, and our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is James Elmendorf. I'm a deputy director of the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy. I'm here today to support the increase in the minimum wage for hotel workers and ensuring that hotel workers get better wages and get the service charges that they deserve. We want to thank you for the steps that you're taking today to address the fundamental issue in our city, which is that workers are working and living in poverty, that the hotel industry has had record profits for 3 straight years. It is a tremendously successful industry, and yet hotel workers are the lowest paid workers in our city. They are consistently living in poverty, and this is a fundamental issue that we must address. I want to thank you for taking the step to address it. We have broad support. You have broad support to deal with this. We have heard from some of the neighborhood councils who have endorsed this effort. More than 750 small businesses have endorsed this effort. More than 8,000 Los Angeles residents have endorsed this effort. We want to ask you all to endorse this effort as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Renee Cordon. I've been working in the hospitality industry for more than 16 years, and I truly believe that this is something that the city and the many families need the rise, because hotels are making a lot of money, millions of dollars, and we need just a little bit more money to support our families, pay our rent, travel, commute to our hotels, to our places of working. So I truly believe that this is something that LA needs for impact thousands of families and children and workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Miguel Cordova. I currently serve as the president of the Harbor Gateway South Neighborhood Council. The Harbor Gateway South is a part of the Council-matic District 15, and we have over 1,000 hotel workers that live there. Today I'm speaking as an individual and resident of the area for the last 8 years. As a resident of the Harbor Gateway, I think it's time that our community and communities across the city of Los Angeles receive some of the benefits of the hospitality boom that we've all seen in recent years. That can happen if hotel workers who've made that boom possible earn a fair and livable wage for their hard work. Also, as a major international destination, much of LA's economy is based in the service sector, and LA's tourism industry is one of the largest service sector employers, accounting for nearly 1 in 10 of our jobs. The hard work of more than 17,000 LA residents who work in hotels is the backbone of this highly successful industry, which serves as an important economic engine for all Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Carol Schatz, John Holland, Nicole Shahanian. Nikki, I'm always about your name, I apologize. And Bob Amano.
Oops. Good afternoon, Carol Schatz, President of the Central City Association. We are asking you to do the responsible thing and to leave this item in committee while the questions that were raised by the quote study that was done, which was a review of existing data, are thoroughly vetted. You are wise enough to know that picking one industry and for higher wages impacts others and will have create a competitive disadvantage for the hotels that are currently operating. I have told you, many of you that we have spoken with, we have lost 2 hotel deals in downtown since this proposal was first mentioned. That's 500 to 1,000 jobs that will not happen. The city is indicating that it wants more hotel rooms in the downtown area. This dissuades people from investing. We have the proof, and 2 other hotel deals are in abeyance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm John Holland, also with the Central City Association, and we believe that a living wage requirement for every hotel employee of a 100 rooms or more hotel will halt hotel development, costing construction of future full-time jobs, as Carol said, and also harm the city's tax revenue. The Blue Sky Report hints at what will happen as, and no one's talked about this report, but the Blue Sky Report hints at what will happen as hotels become less profitable and investors go where they can get a return for their money with less risk. No one will want to invest in existing hotels except through, or in new hotels except through massive TOT subventions. It will cost jobs. Carol mentioned the 2 potential projects that left and the number of jobs there. And a lot of these are adaptive reuse projects. And let me tell you, let me correct something that I understand has been going around. These projects take more labor and cost more money to build than a brand new hotel because you're trying to bring an old, outdated building up to code. Those are going to employ more people because they're boutique hotels, and they're going to employ more people in constructing them. And the threat that this does is it is sending these jobs elsewhere, to other cities, to other counties, and perhaps to other states. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Nicole Shahanian with the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to echo the sentiments that have just been spoken or presented before me. This is going to have a huge impact on Hollywood. Hollywood is based, tourism is one of the biggest industries in Hollywood. You guys, the same committee is also considering a simultaneously report on how to incentivize hotels to come to the city so that we can capture much needed convention dollars. And to me, this proposal is going just contrary to what you're trying to do to incentivize hotels to be here. We've all recognized that poverty is something that needs to be addressed in the city. We just question whether or not targeting one industry, the hotel industry, is going to solve the city's poverty issues. I think there's other things we need to be doing and can be doing to do this, but this is not the way.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Price, honorable committee members, Bob Amano with the Hotel Association of Los Angeles. My colleagues have just reiterated that, yes, the Blue Sky Consulting report is out, and you've seen the determinations that it has affirmed what the hotel industry in Los Angeles has been saying all along, repeatedly, with our concerns of what the mandated wages would impact on our hotels. Loss of jobs, loss of investment through development that has been pulled off the table, and of course the disadvantage in the competition amongst our neighboring cities. However, so it is our sincere hope that this independent analysis that the city had selected Blue Sky to conduct this research, that you would think twice about establishing an artificial wage increase for our Los Angeles hotels. Again, mandated wages, not the cure for this raising of standards of living. It only destroys the jobs that we currently have and the future jobs. Alternatively, there are better solutions, is to create better investment structures, work with the private sector, and focusing on these investments that create real jobs. So we would hope that as partners of the City of Los Angeles, that we would continue to discuss with you what we can really do to help the people that you intend to help in this proposal.
Thank you. Thank you all for your testimony. Okay, next up, Mark Picaria, Renee Cordon, Alexander Marotti. And looked like Stuart Waldman.
Hi, Mark Picaria. A living wage at $15.37 would be a 92% increase over today's minimum wage. It would be a dramatic impact on our hotel, a family-run hotel.
I'm sorry, where's your hotel?
In Hotel Angelino in West Los Angeles. If this living wage went into effect, we would never consider buying another hotel in Los Angeles or even developing a hotel. The living wage impact, and then if you added interest rate increases, a possible recession, possible earthquake, possible terrorism, could be overwhelming to any hotel in Los Angeles. Just right now, we've already calculated it's a 25% reduction in the value of our hotel. The biggest impact is on tipped employees who already make over $15.37 an hour. We pay our restaurant employees benefits, which most restaurants don't. We would not be able to raise our pricing any more than what we already are, and we're already providing benefits. And if we can't increase our pricing, what are we to do? We would end up having busboys making more than the back of the house kitchen cooks. It just wouldn't work. Impact to San Pedro, the Valley, would be overwhelming. We will put an FF&E upgrade on hold. If you look, they've lost jobs in Long Beach and SeaTac already, and the same will happen in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Alexander Marotti, managing member of ICO Development, which is in the process of considering a renovation of the Mayfair Hotel. We bought the Mayfair Hotel about a year and a half ago, initially looking to convert it into residential project. After we saw the activity that's happening downtown, we reconsidered our efforts and considered renovating it as a hotel. Prior to this proposed legislation coming out, if such a legislation comes out, we would seriously reconsider converting this or keeping it as a hotel. The cost to renovate the project, correction to what Mike said earlier, is close to $13 million. That is an extremely high capital improvement to do, and to take a risk of having an additional $900,000 a year in additional operating costs in a risky business like this would make us think twice whether to continue with a hotel project or not.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Stuart Waldman. I'm president of VICA, Valley Industry and Commerce Association. The Blue Sky Consulting Group's conclusion in this study mirror our original concerns with this ordinance, that any benefits to this minimum wage hike are completely negated by the actions taken to absorb higher costs. The study writes that it is likely that in response to a wage increase, many hotels would automate more responsibilities, reduce staff levels through layoffs, and reduce the number of hours for employees. As a result, you will see more Angelinos out of work and completely reliant on government assistance. This is the opposite effect of lifting our residents out of poverty. This ordinance is essentially guaranteeing pink slips, according to the study. Additionally, the study concludes that many affected hotels will likely reduce services such as security, parking attendants, and restaurants, therefore decreasing their use on local vendors and products. The conclusions of the study are clear. This ordinance presents immense trade-offs that threaten the livelihoods of our hotel workers and the livelihoods of other businesses that rely on the hotel industry.
Thank you. Any other cards? Well, I want to thank you all who, yes.
You were called.
You were called. Oh, please.
Thank you for your patience, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ruben Gonzalez, representing the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. My colleagues have stated the issues very well. We've been talking to you on this issue a lot about unintended consequences. After the Blue Sky report, there are no longer unintended consequences. We're all aware of the dangers of the ordinance as presented. There are now intended consequences, impact to the economy, raising unemployment in this industry, and the list goes on in the Blue Sky report. At a minimum, we need to take the time to study these issues as recommended by the Blue Sky report. There's no rush here. Let's have the facts on the ground. Let's see the impact that these laws have had in other places. Let's not do a review of studies, but do a real study that dives in deep so we have real empirical evidence. Only then can we make the right decision. And we are confident that the facts will bore out our concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to again thank all of you for your testimony this afternoon, also for the letters and comments that have been submitted to our offices and to staff. Your feedback is very important in this process. We know that poverty, unemployment, and income disparities are plaguing Los Angeles, and they continue to be a major roadblock to economic revitalization in our city. The living wage for hotel workers helps us take a significant step towards resolving this persistent problem in an industry that has received various benefits from the city and which continues to thrive. And we certainly want that thriving to continue. We're not trying to stop that or shut it down. Hotels in LA have seen their businesses grow consistently over the last 3 years, even with the strains of an economic recession. Our hotels are currently enjoying high occupancy rates of 75%, more than 10 percentage points higher than the national average. And the revenue per room rate is at an all-time high, we understand, at $100 and amongst the highest in the nation. Yet we know that 43% of hotel workers in our city are making poverty wages that don't allow them to provide for their families. Additionally, across the country, we've seen the issue of income inequality continuously come up in local, state, and national discussions. Our president has deemed income equality the defining challenge of our time, and we continue to seek forward-thinking cities like Seattle and others, looking for ways to make things better for their residents and workers. Representing the 9th District, one of the poorest in the region, I have firsthand knowledge of the negative impacts that income disparities can have. When hard-working men and women are forced to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet, they don't have time to be civically engaged and to be involved in their children's education. We need engaged parents in communities like mine if we're ever going to break the cycle of poverty. But this isn't just about individuals. We want to see small businesses thrive. We need to improve the purchasing power of residents who will in turn spend their increased earnings locally. So at this time, I'd like to ask Blue Sky and the CLA to come up to the table. But before they present, I'd like to allow my colleagues a chance to make any comments they may choose this time. Okay. Well, let's get a briefing from Blue Sky and CLA on the findings.
Good afternoon, John Wickham with the Chief Legislative Analyst's Office. At your meeting of February 25th, the committee requested that the public submit reports, data, comments, various documents on the subject matter of the motion Bonin, Martinez, Price, Koretz, Labange, which would raise the minimum wage for hotel workers in hotels with 100 rooms or more to $15.37. And so your committee requested that the public submit this material, and then you requested that the CLA, in conjunction with the City Administrative Officer's Office of Economic Analysis, seek a consultant, an economist, to evaluate those materials and report back in 45 days. So What we did was we went to the OEA, Office of Economic Analysis. We requested that list of economists submit bids for this job. In that process, we selected Blue Sky Consulting to conduct the review. For the last month and a half or so, Blue Sky has been working on reviewing the materials that were submitted. We received 3 reports as well as 7 comment letters from the public on the subject matter. Blue Sky was asked to look at those materials. In addition, we asked Blue Sky to look at other literature on the subject of living wage to try and expand the perspective here and make sure that we hit all of the research that was available on the subject matter. And so now before you is the report that Blue Sky prepared as a result of the committee's request. And that's the summary of how we got to where we are.
Okay. Let's move on to Blue Sky.
Good afternoon. I'm Matt Newman with the Blue Sky Consulting Group, and as John said, we're the ones who prepared the report. It looks like this. At the risk of oversimplifying, I also prepared a 1-page summary, which looks like this, and I'll talk about these documents now. This is a controversial and complicated issue, and it's an issue which has been in some respects very well studied. There's probably been hundreds of studies that have been conducted on the impact of minimum wages over the last several decades. And so part of what we did was we tried to look at that existing research and figure out whether and to what extent it's relevant to the circumstances of this policy in the city of Los Angeles. The big issue, as you know and as you've heard, is whether or not an increase in the minimum wage leads to job losses. It certainly increases the wages of the workers that it's intended to help, at least the ones that retain their jobs, and there's no doubt about that, and that's obviously the most important impact. The question is, does it also lead to job losses? Now, lots of very well done, very credible studies have found that it does not. You cannot measure the impact on job losses for certain kinds of minimum wage increases. However, there's lots of studies that have found the opposite. And so what we tried to do was we tried to say what among this research is the most credible and what among this research is the most directly applicable to the city of Los Angeles. To make that determination, we looked at the specific characteristics of this policy. So one of the reasons that studies may not find an increase in the minimum wage leads to job losses is that most of these increases have applied on a statewide basis or on a national basis as opposed to in one city. So what happens is low-wage workers get an increase from the minimum wage. Those workers have more money to spend in their local economies. They go out and spend that money, and the affected businesses hire more low-wage workers. And so the overall increase or the overall impact on jobs may be non-existent. There might even be an increase in employment. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office looked at this issue looking at the impact of an increase in the federal minimum wage and concluded that there would be an increase in short-term economic activity for just that reason. These low-wage workers will have more money to spend and they'll stimulate the economy. However, there's a couple of reasons why that is not something we may see in the city of Los Angeles in this case, and the reasons are several-fold. First of all, we're looking at just a city here, and so when you look at just a city, lots of those workers are going to go home to where they live outside of the city, or they're going to go shop at places outside of the city, and so some of the benefits of this kind of policy may not be directly felt by residents of the city. Now, lots of them will, of course, but some of them won't, and so that's one difference between a policy or research that looks at what the impact is on a statewide basis compared to a national basis. The other reason is that this is a relatively large increase in the minimum wage, and when the Congressional Budget Office looked at this issue earlier this year, they concluded that a larger increase in the minimum wage would be more likely to have these offsetting employment reductions as employers look for ways to save costs. And so because this is a relatively large increase, it seems likely to us that some hotel workers will lose their jobs as a result of this policy, and that the research which has found no increase in job losses or no reduction in jobs may not directly apply in this particular case. Lastly, another thing that happens when a minimum wage increase occurs on a statewide or a national basis is that all similarly affected firms have the same increase in wages, so everyone can raise prices a little bit. And so that means that instead of having to cut wages, you can raise prices a little bit, and that allows you to maintain your workforce. In this case, however, what would probably happen is that there would be a lot of downward pressure on prices because only some hotels are affected and only hotels in the city of LA are affected, whereas those in neighboring jurisdictions are not affected. And so the hotel owners would probably have a limited ability to pass on the wage increase in the form of higher prices, whereas when a minimum wage increase has occurred elsewhere on a statewide basis, all restaurants, for example, could raise their prices a little bit to accommodate it. So we looked at this research and tried to see whether and how it would apply to LA, and for the reasons I said, we think the circumstance here might be a little bit different. And so what we basically concluded is that the following effects are likely. Now, I should say we don't know exactly the order of magnitude of these effects. We don't know how big they are, but all of the following are very likely to occur. First of all, workers will get a wage increase, and their standard of living will increase, and those workers will benefit. They will spend more money in the local economy, and those affected businesses will benefit, and they may even hire more people. In addition, however, some workers in the hotel industry will probably lose their jobs. There's not another way for the hotel owners to accommodate all of this wage increase without at least looking to cut staffing as well as other expenditures. Some hotel owners will look for ways to save money by investing less in other things they would purchase in the local economy, deferring capital upgrades and so forth. It's likely the case that the profits of these hotels would go down, and some of these hotels might not be able to sustain themselves, and that these hotels that have lower profits might have to declare bankruptcy or do some other kind of restructuring. Now, I don't think very many hotels will actually close down. I think the value of these hotels will go down and the hotel owners might have to sell, but someone else would probably buy those hotels and keep operating them, and because they'd have lower debt service costs, they could pay higher wages and continue to operate the hotels. And then lastly, there would probably be some downward pressure on future hotel development in LA. Now, this is really perhaps the biggest unknown, and maybe the most important potential economic consequence here is what would happen to future hotel development. Lots of large hotels that have been built in LA in the last decade or more have received a subvention of TOT revenues, and in exchange have agreed to have workforce subject to collective bargaining, which, as I understand it, would exempt them from this policy. So in that case, those hotels, those kinds of new hotels that accept this deal, if it continues to be offered, would not really feel the effects of this policy because they were going to have a unionized workforce anyway, and so there would not be a disincentive for those hotels, for those investors to develop those hotels. In other cases, however, if new hotels wouldn't accept this deal or wouldn't be eligible for this deal, or if this deal from the city for the subvention of TOT revenues were discontinued or not offered in the future, then you would see a reduction in the amount of investment that would occur, and new hotels that might otherwise get built would not be built. So there would almost certainly be some downward pressure on development, and some number of hotel projects would probably not go forward. But how big that is at this point is not something that we really know the answer to. So our ultimate conclusion, I think, is this. There's a trade-off here. There's benefits to workers that get a raise and keep their jobs, but the cost of that benefit is borne by some workers who would lose their jobs and by hotel owners who would suffer a reduction in their profits. And I'm happy to go into more detail about what we think the economic effects might be and answer your questions, but that's the very quick overview of what we found based on the research that we reviewed and the materials that were submitted.
Okay, thank you. Members, any questions?
Yes. So what strategies have you seen employed? How would we work to avoid job loss, and how would we work to avoid downward pressures on future investments?
Well, I mean, those are somewhat different questions. With respect to how to reduce the incentive to cut jobs, you could ask the hotel industry what strategies they might employ. One strategy you might consider is reducing the kinds of job classifications that are affected. People talked about tipped workers. Now, I don't have data to say yet whether tipped workers in general make more than $15.37 an hour or they don't. But if they do make more than $15.37 an hour, then there's reason to think that maybe the policy shouldn't apply to them, or the impact would be minimized if those kinds of workers were not included.
I just want to cut you off because I want you to stay in your frame of mind there, but What's the cost of tip workers, though, to the employer?
The cost?
Right.
I mean, the cost is with their hourly wages.
Okay, so the fact that somebody's a tip worker does not enhance the cost for the employer.
Well, except that many tipped workers are making the current minimum wage, and so they were the ones that would experience, some of them that would experience an
I'm only
increase.
focused on the cost side.
Yeah.
Because I'm concerned about the cost of this on the employer. Right, because what we're arguing here is that the cost side is the motivating factors on job loss and depresses economic development.
Yes, that's right. And many tipped workers are making the minimum wage, and so that many tipped workers would experience the largest increase in wages, or the cost for the employer would be greatest for tipped workers to the extent they're the ones that are currently making the minimum, whereas some non-tipped workers are making in excess of the minimum or in excess of the current minimum, and so the increase for them would be smaller. Another thing to think about is that the food service elements of restaurants may be subject to more local competition even than the hotels themselves, because a hotel restaurant is competing with other restaurants that wouldn't be subject to this policy, and so it's possible that the impact would be more acutely felt in the food service operations of some hotels, because the hotel restaurants compete with the non-hotel restaurant across the street that wouldn't be subject to this policy. So to the extent you're looking to minimize the impact, that is one strategy that may be worth further evaluating. As far as the impact on development, part of the issue here is that we don't know to what extent future hotels would be eligible for and would receive the current subvention of TOT revenues, which the city has offered in the past. So any increased level of certainty with respect to that policy that was offered to hotel developers would help minimize the uncertainty that they would feel in pursuing a hotel project. And the more broadly that kind of a policy were to apply, the lower the impact would be of this kind of minimum wage policy on the downward pressure for development.
You mentioned the TOT. Are there any other factors that might be attractive to the hotel industry?
I was not asked to look at what the sort of specific development incentives that the hotel industry might want are, and so I'm really not in a position to comment on that. But I did look at the city's current policy about the TOT subvention, and I think the issue there is if it broadly applies, then there's relatively little impact on development, and if it's narrowly applied, there's a bigger impact on development. So the more broadly that policy were to be made to apply, the lower the impact on development.
Other questions, comments? Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have quite a lot. I hope that we can get at least some of them in. But okay. And I should preface it by saying that when we discussed this at the February 25th meeting, what I had anticipated, and this is not a slight to Blue Sky at all, but what I had anticipated is that today we would have a comprehensive economic analysis of this that indicated a discussion of quantification of economic stimulus, quantification of job loss, quantification of impacts on future development, and we have none of that. And I understand that some of that is because of the inherent limitations in a narrow-casted policy like that, which is unlike any of the precedents that you would really study, with a few exceptions. And I would expect that some of the reason for that is also because you were on a very tight time frame, and getting that done even as to the closer precedents in this kind of a time frame was a challenge. Is that fair to say?
Well, we were simply asked to review the materials that were submitted and the existing research. I think you're right, it would have been difficult for us to do much more than that in the very short time frame that was allotted, but the specific assignment that was given to us was for now not to do any new research, but to just look at the research that had been done.
Well, but in fairness, I mean, even the letters that were submitted by stakeholders included lots and lots of areas of inquiry that are not addressed at all in your report. And one of them is the Long Beach experience. One of them is the LAX experience, the New York experience, and some other examples which your report indicated would be worthy areas of future study, but which aren't before us right now.
Yes, and that is because, as far as I'm aware, there were not specific studies of those issues or those experiences that we could evaluate. So I think there is the possibility for research to shed some light on that, but that research hadn't been done.
It would be new research,
Yes.
in other words. It's not something that you could review, you could do in a literature review.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
So I don't know if this is within the scope of the data that you have available or that the CLA has available right now, but that the chairman made. Can everybody turn their cell phones off? It's been multiple times now during this meeting. Can you just take a moment to turn your cell phones off, please? The LA Times, recent LA Times editorial note, well, let me just first say that the chairman started us off today by poignantly reminding us of the crisis of wage inequality that we have, not only in this city, but throughout the country. And we're going in absolutely the wrong direction when it comes to wage inequality. It's getting worse. We're destroying our middle class. We're increasingly having more and more of our families dependent upon essentially poverty wages if they're lucky to have a job. And the LA Times editorial recently said that almost half of the workers in Los Angeles earn less than $15 an hour. Is that consistent with the information that you have available to you, or do you know?
I'm sure there are many workers that earn less than $15 an hour. I don't have the specific numbers to answer that question in front of me today.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have that data available.
The Times also indicated that 25% of families with children have wages that would be below the poverty level in Los Angeles. And, one question I would have at the outset, which I haven't seen answered at all in any of the materials before me, is to what extent does this policy move the needle on that larger question of wage inequity throughout Los Angeles and throughout California and throughout America? Essentially, the policy that we're talking about here affects an industry, and then it excludes from that industry certain categories of businesses in that industry, and it excludes from that those that are subject to a collective bargaining agreement, or presumably may at some point in the future be subject to a collective bargaining agreement. So what that leaves us is a segment of our economy which is definitely among those who are impacted by this wage inequity, but it excludes, I'm guessing, 99% of the people in Los Angeles who are also facing that challenge. And so that brings me back to my initial concern, which I think you do address in your literature review, which is that typically the economic impacts of these sorts of increases are measured when you have it broadly applied, so that you get the economic benefits of spending in the economy as well, which your report indicated would not be the case here, because those who are receiving the increase are typically not staying in Los Angeles hotels or utilizing their services.
Well, the impact wouldn't be felt to the same extent it would be if the minimum wage were something that were applied broadly across, for example, the whole state. The workers that get paid more will spend more money, they just won't spend it on hotels. So the job losses will be concentrated in the hotel industry. There will be some offsetting job gains in, say, the retail sector, where the hotel workers that earn more go out and spend their money. But because the economy is small relative to the size of the state, much of that benefit will be felt outside of the city's economy.
So let me give you maybe a more concrete example, and maybe the CLA can speak to this. Would it be, and maybe we don't know until the city attorney actually drafts an ordinance, but would it be the case that this would apply to, for example, a restaurant that leases space in a hotel?
That would be part of the instruction for the council if you intend that to be part of the ordinance. I'm not sure that it would. I think we would have to ask the city attorney if it was even possible to include that component. Is this an instruction or an ordinance that controls the owner of the hotel, therefore, and then does it then roll out to apply to their contractors, their lessees, or is it only the people who are employed by that hotel operator?
So we don't know the answer to that?
No.
So in a given block, then, of our city, a hotel might own a restaurant inside of the hotel. It might lease space to a restaurant in that same hotel. And next door to that hotel might be another restaurant. So the busboys in those three restaurants, one would be getting minimum wage, one would be getting a living wage, and one, we don't know one way or the other.
Yeah.
Right?
Likely two would be living wage, one would be...
Well, only
one would be living wage, two would be minimum wage.
The answer to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can say that my understanding is that in Long Beach, the hotel restaurants have been included. That the way this was described to me is that the policy was written as under the roof, and that employees that were under the roof were included. But that is, I think, a drafting choice that would need to be looked at.
Okay, so a restaurant that's leasing space in a hotel that, for example, pays the city sales tax but doesn't participate in the TOT obligations of the hotel might be making its decision on whether or not to continue to operate in a hotel in Los Angeles or settle elsewhere based on that cost element, but that hasn't been considered as part of your review.
Since that policy choice had not been explicitly made, I didn't make an assumption one way or another about that.
Okay. I still haven't gotten an answer, and I've been asking this question literally for months. There seems to be a disagreement between advocates and opponents of this policy as to the legal ramifications of excluding tipped employees in a policy like this. And I've tried to get a definitive answer to that, and I've heard polar opposites in response to that. So do we have somebody from the city attorney's office who can speak to that?
In fact, they Good afternoon, Valerie Flores
Good
and
afternoon.
Basha Jankowski from the City Attorney's Office.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. First, if I may I address your prior question about contractors within a hotel,
Absolutely.
including restaurants? Currently, our airport hotel ordinance does include, as covered and required to pay a minimum wage or a living wage, contractors who operate in the hotel. And in including those contractors, at least the policy at that time or the instructions we have were to preclude hotels from contracting out restaurant operations and other gift shop operations to avoid paying living wage. So at least with regard to the current airport hotel ordinance, contractors, anyone doing business under the hotel roof are covered.
Okay. Okay.
And then I'm going to have Basha Jankowski speak to state law with regard to whether or not the city may exempt tipped workers from the living wage proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. There is case law that does preclude a two-tier minimum wage system so that tipped employees are treated differently from other employees receiving the minimum wage.
Okay, so, and how did they define that? For example, I know there's been a lot of controversial discussion nationally about whether to have a separate youth minimum wage or other kinds of minimum wages that would be essentially a two-tier. How does that case law define the prohibited two-tier approach?
Well, it looks at the California Labor Code section, section 351, which speaks to gratuities as the sole property of the employee.
Oh, so it is, the state law is specific
Yes.
to the tip issue. Okay.
Well, the state law says that no employer can collect, take, or receive any gratuity, and then based on the legislative intent, which says that the purpose of the article is to prevent fraud upon the public in connection with the practice of tipping, people assume the tips are going to the employees, and therefore the employer can't retain that in the sense of a different wage, which, unlike the federal law, which does allow for a wage credit. So based on this section and case law, says you can't have a two-tier minimum wage system containing a lower alternative minimum wage for certain employees who customarily receive tips.
Okay, so the ambiguity is because it's in interpretation of case law, and the case law suggests that if you had two tiers, it would be the practical equivalent of the employer getting credit for some of the tipped income.
Right. It would allow the employer to get an offset, essentially,
Yeah.
for the tipped portion of the employee's compensation, which state law mandates can only go to the employee, not
Okay.
the employer.
I think I understand. Could if you would be kind enough offline to just make sure my staff has a copy of that labor code and the cases, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly.
Thank you. I have many more questions, Mr. Chairman, but I don't want to monopolize. But if I could just
Why don't you go ahead?
have one other category, and then the city. It is an immense priority of the city right now. It's been a priority for labor, for our business community, for our mayor, and especially for balancing our budget to try to encourage more hotel development, particularly around the convention center. We have a goal of building 5,000 more rooms at least in order to service the convention center. And as you mentioned, many of those hotels have been incentivized by TOT subventions. There's current policy development going on right now to put subvention into a broader framework to try to develop a citywide policy to address when we have subvention agreements and under what conditions and to what degree and so on. Do we have a sense of the degree to which a policy like this would impact the goal of increasing the number of rooms available in the city, particularly with regard to the ongoing policy development on subvention?
I mean, I think the short answer is yes and no, unfortunately.
That every economist's answer to everything. No offense, but we hear that a lot.
I wish there were simple answers, but I feel that it's my job to tell you what is the truth as I understand it, so that's the more nuanced answer. This would put a downward pressure on the incentive to develop in the city. That's what I said before. However, to the extent that a hotel was going to take advantage of this subvention policy and agree to have workers subject to a collective bargaining agreement anyway, which has been the case for virtually all of the large hotels that have been built in the last however many years, of which there have not been a huge number, but the ones that have been built have unionized workforces and have taken the subvention agreement. Those hotels would not feel an impact from this policy because they would have a unionized workforce and wouldn't be subject to it. And so it doesn't seem to me that the incentive to develop a hotel would change for them. However, if some of the hotels that would have been built or are thinking about developing wouldn't take advantage of that policy because they didn't view it as advantageous, because they weren't eligible for it, because the city discontinues it, or for any other reason, then those hotels would now say, well, now my costs are higher. Do I still want to invest in LA, or do I want to invest somewhere else where my cost structure would be lower? So there would be downward pressure on those kinds of hotels, and those hotel projects may or may not proceed, but they would certainly, probably some number of those would not go forward as a result.
So, for example, somebody mentioned earlier adaptive reuse projects, which typically are not going to be eligible for a subvention. Somebody, the small hotels mentioned the impacts that they would experience. Typically, subvention would be eligible. Hotels over 200 rooms would be eligible, I think, under the current direction.
That's the direction we're going in that policy, although there are some, that policy is coming forward soon at your next meeting, I hope. And there will be some analysis of this question in there. The impact is on the smaller number of, the smaller hotels, rooms with 100 to 200 rooms, I think is where we're going to see the greater impact. And those are most likely going to be adaptive reuse projects in the downtown area and some other parts of the city. So we do need to take a much closer look at that. Their costs are different on the construction side. They're going to have higher costs on the construction side, but they're not full-service hotels. They don't have the same banquet facilities. They don't have a lot of the same services you're going to have in a 500-room hotel that's serving a convention. Sure. So those, as Matt's saying, there are lots of balances and trade-offs in the types of hotels and how the incentive could be applied. There are a lot of developers who simply would not, just from principle, want to get into a subvention agreement and would decide, I don't want the complexity associated with that. I'm going to go to Pasadena or Glendale or some other city where I don't have to deal with that. And so I think that might be some of the other types of projects that we would be at risk of losing, that we wouldn't really have any way to, even if we gave them money, would not attract.
Or the 180-room hotel that would bear the impact of this policy but not get the benefit of the subvention unless as we develop the policy, we make those things parallel in some way so that the subvention direction that we go in is consistent with this policy.
It may be that the subvention needs to take a stronger look at the renovation components that might be available. We've never done a renovation project in the subvention program, and so that's new territory for us that we would have to explore in greater depth.
So then you mentioned the 500-room hotel that is, designed to be of more use for the city in servicing conventions, for example. The report indicated that convention hotels would be less likely to be able to pass on these costs because of the competition for convention business. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, there's basically three categories of hotel visitors. There's sort of your leisure travelers. Those are the most price sensitive. There's convention business, which is also somewhat price sensitive, and then the sort of last minute business travelers are the least price sensitive. So the more price sensitive the hotel guests are, the consumers are, the lower the ability of a hotel to raise prices. So if you're a hotel that primarily caters to leisure and convention travelers, you'll have the lowest ability to pass on a wage increase through higher prices.
So if you're a convention hotel and your costs are going to go up, chances are you're not going to, the chances increase that you're not going to want to invest in Los Angeles unless you get that subvention.
That's right.
Okay. I've got more, Mr. Chairman, but let me pass.
In the report, you indicate the reduction of profitability for hotels would reduce the likelihood that new hotels would be developed in the city. You're talking about larger hotels, smaller hotels? Just to make that point again.
Well, any hotel that's affected by this policy. And so as we've discussed, the extent to which a hotel is affected by this policy depends to a large extent on the extent to which a future hotel, would be eligible for the subvention incentives we've been talking about. So if a hotel was going to get that subvention and accept the terms of that deal anyway, this policy wouldn't really affect them. However, if a hotel was not going to choose that or wasn't eligible for that or it wasn't offered to them, then this policy would directly affect them, and that project may or may not go forward, but it certainly would feel the impact.
Okay. Councilwoman?
Well, I think Mr. Krikorian touched on some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about, but most specifically around some of the policy that's currently being drafted on hotel incentives. And I don't want to speak too much because I know it's Mr. Curran is working on it and so is Mr. Weezar. But I do want to find an opportunity to be able to marry the two. I'm 41 years old, and a lot of you have heard me say this before, but having grown up in a time where you had big manufacturing jobs, I grew up in the Valley my entire life, you had those good paying jobs once upon a time. All of that is gone. We no longer have the ability to pay people $15, $16 an hour because those jobs are gone. It completely changed our lifestyle, or I should say my mom and dad, as soon as they were able to move into that category when I was about 10 years old. So I can speak to the benefits of what having your parents make a living wage does that to a family. I can speak that in many of our families who are able to get into this category can do so as well. But there is an opportunity here to be able to look at an industry that's doing fairly well with almost 80% occupancy rate in some parts of Los Angeles and say, if you are benefiting from the tourism in the city and you are thriving in that industry, that somehow that needs to trickle down to families and people who work for you. I think we have to say that as a city, and we have to be very conscious about what that does to families in the city. It transforms their lifestyle. What they're going to be able to do with their time off, perhaps when one parent is making $15 an hour. That's not that is almost unheard of in this new era. But one of the things that I think we also should look at is, in working with Mr. Price and Mr. Huizar, how do we create those incentives for those hotels that want to come into Los Angeles, who are willing to pay the living wage, that are being incentivized to build here because they're getting back their TOT. How do we make sure that as they're thriving, that their workers are actually getting the benefits of them doing business in Los Angeles? I think that's what we need to focus on.
Well, I hope I haven't conveyed the impression that I don't think there's a benefit to this policy. There is. Lots of workers would get a wage increase, and a very substantial one. That's the first thing I've mentioned. The sort of impact of that on people's lives is sort of beyond the subject of economic analysis and gets into the realm of what you guys all get to evaluate. I'm simply trying to point out that there's a trade-off here.
And I understand. Your task was difficult, and this is a policy decision at the end of the day. I don't think that either study, either way, whether you've had more time to look at the data, I wish we had more, would actually give you a sense of whether this is a good thing or not necessarily. Both sides are going to differ, but I think it does give us an opportunity as policymakers to drive this and really seize the opportunity to not only make sure that business comes back into Los Angeles, but that those that are doing very well and thriving, that trickles down to the very people that live here.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up point on that. I think your report did make very clear that those who receive the increase will obviously receive a benefit. That is a significant benefit. The challenge that I have looking at this is that your report also says that it is very likely, if not certain, that other workers will suffer from this. Some will lose their jobs, some will lose hours. And we don't have, maybe with more time we would be able to assess it. Maybe with review of the Long Beach experience, maybe with review of the LAX experience and other, maybe with some actual economic analysis of those things, we can assess these trade-offs that you've cited to. Of course they're trade-offs. That's everything we do is a trade-off. But I like to make my decisions about trade-offs based on data of what is in the net, what's going to produce a net positive result. And to that point, we've spoken about the relative success of the hotel industry now. I think you could probably break that down in different categories of the industry and say some are doing better than others. But 5 years ago, they weren't doing so well. Right after September 11th, and they weren't doing so well. Right after the economy collapsed, they weren't doing so well. So, what they're doing now is not necessarily a basis for a long-term policy decision. Walmart's doing pretty well too, but the guy who's buffing the floor in Walmart is not going to see a benefit from this, while the guy who's buffing the floor in the lobby of a hotel is. The fast food industry is doing pretty well. The oil industry is doing pretty well. But, the guy who cleans up at the gas station is not going to see a benefit of this. The guy who cleans up at the hotel is. So, I'm not sure that breaking down the economy that narrowly really addresses the main problem that we're trying to address. And I've got concerns that we're leaving so many out of this, I guess, is what I would say.
Well, I certainly understand that concern, but I think we have to begin somewhere. and I think many would like to see a citywide approach, and perhaps this will be an entree to that, should this be successful. Any other comments?
Yes.
Questions?
Are we
Mr.
ready to
Cedillo?
wrap up? We're wrapping up.
We're going to wrap it after you make some comments, and I'll close it.
Well, I share your concerns, and I think all of us share those concerns. In fact, I'm sure everybody has those concerns because, as I was asked yesterday, I think we're moving to critical mass on this discussion. When Gary Tobin or Rick Caruso or Eli Broad talk about the need to raise the minimum wage, we're beyond critical mass. This is not just a question of advocacy for poor families by advocates for the poor, but a discussion about how our economy is working or not working. And so I think it's very important we have also the governor and the president who share this point of view. It's interesting, as I read this report, everybody in this room is right. So there's going to be job loss, and there's pressure on investment, and some people are going to be discouraged by it. On the other hand, a small group of families are going to have increased wages, and including tipped employees because it's the law. But also, I'm not concerned with what the issue is with that, since the employer doesn't pay those wages. So it's interesting because both sides are right here, and that's what you said. You're right?
Yes, you're right.
Wages are going up, and the trade-off is there's going to be job loss. Our job is to reconcile that. How do we reconcile that? And I think we heard some of these things here. Number one, obviously, we will, for a moment, disadvantage other sectors of the economy. And we may disadvantage ourselves as a city if this doesn't grow to become a county-wide or a statewide initiative, right? Because it's true. People make economic decisions, workers make economic decisions, businesses make economic decisions. And so we have to think about this as the beginning of a conversation, not so much the end of a conversation. And I think it's one, as I said, when you have Gary Tobin and Rick Caruso and Eli Broad having this conversation, then it's a very serious matter that's affecting our local economy. So the question is, how do we go forward? This is the proposal that's before us now. There are things that we can do to modify it, to talk about implementation. I spent a few years in the labor movement. Everything is about how you implement, how you execute, right? How do you tweak it? And so I think we're going to hear about some proposals about how we go forward, because these are legitimate concerns. There's a difference between global corporations and those that are going to build those huge 1,000-bed hotels downtown, and a difference between the Mayfair, which is a very legitimate concern that I have in my district on 7th Street. I appreciate the investment. I appreciate the commitment. There's a real distinction between those who are rehabbing and doing adaptive reuse, and those who are just building the traditional convention hotels that we want to place. I will say to you, or I'll speak for myself, but we want them all. We want workers to get paid well, and we want economic development and prosperity. We want shared prosperity. We want to create a scenario where the TOT benefits and our desire to build the other 4,500 beds that are needed for our convention center, that we pay for that. But we also want to make sure that in paying for that and working to build economic development in the city, that workers are also able to participate in that. I represent, arguably, the poorest district in the city, and it's just west of downtown. It's Pico Union. It's the most dense area, without doubt. And so I have to think about what is the policy that we can build today that will help economic development for those individual units, those small households, and that has the least minimum impact on the concerns that you raised. And so I think that's the way we need to go forward. Now, there's no question, workers and families have been struggling with this economy since 1980. There's no question about it. I could lecture you on this for a long time. This is not the place, but there's no question about that. But also, as you indicated, my dear colleague, we saw on 9/11 There were great efforts. After that, everybody pitched in to help save the economy and help save the hotel industry. Unfortunately, the workers didn't really get the benefit of that, but there were efforts within both the HCRE and the hotel industry walking arm in arm through the halls of Congress to make sure that we could protect the industry. In the post-2009 period, the same thing. But the tragedy, nobody's fault here, but the tragedy of all that is that workers have not benefited from those efforts. They've kept their jobs, but they have not benefited. And the movement of wealth to the 1% is, we have not yet structured ways to hold that together, right? And so this is what this policy is about, is trying to figure out what are the bridges that we can build for workers to share in prosperity. But the point is, we must have prosperity, and so we must figure out what are the things that do not undermine development. I don't think the people who brought this proposal are interested in job loss, right? We do not want to undermine the investments, and we want to figure out how to deal specifically, since I am now a local representative, specifically with the Mayfair and smaller hotels like that. And how do we think of a broader, as we build 4,500, if not more, hotel beds in the city, what is the policy that the city engages in, so that when we're making those investments in those hotels, we make sure, as my colleague said, that that investment also benefits the workforce. I'm prepared to move forward. At this moment, I know you have some amendments and
I do. Thank you for your comments.
Yes, and I would say that I think this, as I said, this is the beginning of a conversation. Ultimately, it must include all industries. Ultimately, it must go beyond the city limits, because we will be disadvantaged if we don't, and we don't want to have a Detroit where all the prosperity rings around the city. So we have to think about how we create a countywide and ultimately a statewide policy that makes sure that we have shared prosperity. And
thank you, Member, for your comments and for the comments of those participants in today's meeting. I want to make it clear this is the beginning of the conversation. This is not going to be the end. This is a place where we hope this conversation will continue and be further enhanced. I want the audience to know that your concerns, combined concerns, are not falling on deaf ears. But certainly, as policymakers, sometimes we have to make tough, hard policy decisions, and I think this certainly is one of those occasions. LA has always been a progressive leader, setting an example for the nation, and I think there's an opportunity for us to do so in this situation as well. For me, the choice is clear. I was elected to improve the quality of life for citizens who live in the 9th District, certainly and citywide. And I think that taking into the considerations raised today, there's a way to reach at least a solid compromise that permits us to move forward and to do the right thing for working men, working women. So today I'm going to propose two specific components. One, I'd like to see a phase-in policy that's going to be fair to the hotel owners and gives them time to adjust to new rules and regs, and to have a provision where businesses facing a financial hardship can have an opportunity to protest or to seek some relief from this minimum wage ordinance. We're going to request the city attorney to prepare and to present an ordinance to implement the living wage to make it effective on July 1, 2015 for hotels with 300 or more rooms, and for July 1, 2016 with hotels of 120 or more rooms. Okay, so we have 300 rooms and then 120. Also, request the city attorney to add a hardship waiver to the ordinance, which would allow for hotels which have some financial hardships, some benchmarks for determining what an exemption for this ordinance would be, similar to what was done in the airport. And also to include a service charge protection in the ordinance. Yeah. Right. 125, I'm sorry, excuse me. So 300 rooms, effective July 1, 2015, and for 125 rooms on July 1, 2016. Is that clear? Let me try it again. We're going to request the city attorney to prepare and present an ordinance to implement a living wage, hotel living wage ordinance effective July 1, 2015 for hotels with 300 or more rooms. And that ordinance would take effect on July the 1st, 2016 with hotels with from 120 to 300. 125 to 300. 125.
Councilmember, Madeline Rackley with the CAO.
Yes.
Can you repeat your very last one about the service?
Say, Marissa. Yeah. Service charge protection clause in the ordinance to include that, as well as a waiver to the ordinance for hotels that have a financial hardship as defined by the ordinance. All right. All right, members, any other business at this time?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm still a little unclear on that. I don't know what a service charge protection is, and I'm not sure what the analysis is that determines what the right number is for the small hotel, whether it's 120, 130, 140, 125. I don't have enough information in front of me about the demographics of that sector of the industry to really know what impact that has on the industry or on workers. I think it's helpful to have an effective date in 2015, but I'm gathering from these proposed amendments that despite Blue Sky's recommendation of a phased approach, the phasing is only in the hotels that it applies to rather than in the amount of the increase. And I think what Blue Sky had suggested and again, we're the policymakers, but with respect, Blue Sky indicated that a phased increase in the amount would help to mitigate the adverse economic impacts that might come from this. Was that what you had said?
That is what I had in mind, yes, that the amount of the increase would step up over time till you get to the level you want to achieve.
So I think if we're going to go forward as proposed and we have an effective date of July 1st, 2015 for the ordinance, we will have another opportunity.
Correct.
The ordinance will come before us. We'll be able to evaluate it. I would just propose that between now and July 1st, 2015, and hopefully with some room to spare, we actually conduct an economic analysis that responds to some of the questions that we've raised here today, that actually assesses the Long Beach, the LAX, the New York, and other precedents so that we can make a determination based on actual data and experience what the economic impacts of this will be. I agree with you. We're all elected to improve the quality of life of the people that we represent. But, I honestly, as I sit here, I still don't know whether this measure does that. It does for some, but I also know that I'm going to hurt some by voting for this. I'm going to put people out of work by voting for this. I'm going to cause other people to lose income because of this. And I don't know whether it's a net plus or not. Only an economic analysis is going to indicate that. So I would ask that the CAO be instructed. Is it the CAO or the CLA who has the bench?
CLA and CAO. CAO has the Office of Economic Analysis.
The CAO, through the Office of Economic Analysis, actually report back on these impacts. And if that requires making a comprehensive economic analysis, then we're going to need to figure out a way to do that. Because I'm concerned that I don't feel comfortable that I know that this is going to produce the benefits that we're hoping that it's going to produce. So I would ask for that kind of economic analysis. It can happen through the course of the year, as prior to the effective date of the ordinance, and we would still have a chance to make any kind
Well,
of...
certainly part of the phase in is so that we can continue that discussion.
Exactly.
And so fully assess the impact. However, we do want to move forward. It's clear that the issue of income disparity is negatively impacting citizens in this city. It is a balance. It's a tough balance. How do you determine, if you're creating good or if you're harming others? So we have to, I think, go with the general good and certainly go with kinds of policies that we want to be proud of in our city that move the agenda forward. And so, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate those comments. I would note that I don't think anyone here wants anybody to lose a job, and I don't think anyone here wants to suppress economic development. I don't think the advocates of this proposal want that. That's an amazing frustration of purpose if you say we want to raise wages for poor people by putting other people out of work. So the question is for us to figure out with data how to get to that point. But I'm also concerned on the other side of, the right number of rooms, because I think there's a world of difference between global corporations who have a lot of ways to shift costs from one state to another state and one country to another country, and those organic developers in this region, people who are entrepreneurs who come throughout the world, who are, as we've heard some of the testimony, making their efforts to build one hotel, right? Making their efforts to build a boutique hotel out of their own initiative and their desire. Those who have smaller hotels that are distinct, that don't have that cushion. And those, I think that number is very important for us to know, because it's there where we rely on that network of those smaller hotels. We rely on that network for the employment for so many other people in the industry. It's a significant part. It's like small businesses. It's a significant part of our economy that we have to make sure, because that's where the push out will take place. It's there that they'll have to make tougher economic decisions because they don't have any other factors that they can manipulate. And so that's an important number for us to have, as well as any others. I'm fine with the costs on the others. And then, of course, it requires us to have a conversation about then the cost to the city. What are we going to pay in terms of subsidizing and supporting these efforts at economic development? And we should have those conversations together, so it's not on one hand we're raising costs, on the other hand we're increasing them on our side.
And I think that the chairman's proposal, in fact, moves us towards that, because by postponing an effective date until 2015, it allows us to have that discussion with regard to the policy making on the subvention, and hopefully we can make those two policies comport with one another. And I agree with you, Mr. Cedillo, on the room number being, that's a pretty critical decision. And for some hotels that are probably represented here today, whether it's 125 or 130 is a critical distinction that will mean whether they stay in business or not. And so for those sorts of answers, we'll have more time to assess it, provided that, and I am proposing this as a friendly amendment, Mr. Chairman, that economic analysis be done before the effective date of this ordinance. And so if that is part of this, then we'll have an opportunity to revisit those questions before these take effect. I think I heard earlier one of the representatives of the small hotels indicated that the average size of hotels between 100 and 200 rooms was 137 or something. 139.
Yeah.
So,
again,
where that number falls near that average is going to be pretty critical.
I think there's been an effort to certainly take into consideration the smaller hotels and the concerns that were raised by all, whether it's a perfect calculation. We don't know, but we think we're on the right track. And I'm confident that if we can move forward with the motion as proposed, it provides us with a chance to create a framework for further discussions and implementation of a plan that can be effective in increasing the minimum wage for workers in this hotel setting. All right. But there's no other business?
Well, but is my request for an economic analysis included as a friendly amendment in that proposal? Because that's critical to my assessment of whether we move forward today or not.
The economic analysis before it comes back to the council for discussion?
Before the effective date of the ordinance in 2015.
Oh, before the effective date. Well, that can
so that they have time to evaluate it, and we would have time to change.
Well, again, I don't know how much additional research or study you'd like to see, but if you want to be specific, I don't have a problem with including that.
Well, I think okay. I would like a review of the Long Beach, the impacts of the Long Beach ordinance, an impact of the economic impact of the LAX ordinance, and any other precedent in which there's been a specific minimum wage within the hotel industry that you're aware of. I'd like those to be assessed as to the impacts on job loss, on investment in renovation to hotels, on services provided by hotels, on hours reduced by the employees, and I think I've touched upon a number of other issues that we've discussed today. But I think at minimum those issues, as well as the appropriate size of the small hotel exemption, would be
prior to implementation. Prior to implementation.
Yeah.
2015.
They're going to need a lot of time to do that. We can't do it by the time it gets to council, for sure.
All right. Anything else?
Good to go.
Thank you for your participation in today's meeting. This meeting is adjourned.
All right. Thank you.
Where is Mike?